I have 12, so we'll go ahead and get started. Tara, for the next few minutes as I'm starting, if you don't mind keeping an eye on the waiting room so we don't have anybody waiting out there. Welcome back to day 2 of our summer training series. During this session, we'll be looking at outcomes from kind of a more personal level. So this will be a little reflective today. A couple reminders: if you missed the last live session and you're going to do the makeup, that is posted on Google Classroom under day 1. And essentially you're asked to watch the recorded video, and there are some prompts within the session that you answer those, and then I can mark you down as doing the makeup for that session. So that's how you make up if you miss a session. Again, it is helpful for you to be, when you're able to participate, to be participating in the live session, especially as we move through some of the middle and later weeks. It's pretty discussion based, so we don't want anyone to miss out on that if you can help it. We do appreciate if you can leave your camera on just so that we can all stay engaged, but I understand there are times where you might have to be off camera, or sometimes just your connection requires it. And Rhonda, I'll have to check. I think I have. Yes, I have your makeup down and confirmed, Rhonda. So once you go in and kind of answer the questions, then I can see, and then I can count you for the makeup. So yes, I have yours down, Rhonda. Okay. Any questions from last week or anything like that? Okay. And just so you know, on the Google Classroom, if it's something that's kind of pre-work or a pre-question, that's something to kind of do in advance of that session, of the live session. There are some things that are reflective questions. Those you can do after we cover the session. And sometimes it's just handouts that I want to give to you in advance. So again, today we're going to be focusing at looking at outcomes on a more personal level, and starting to think and reflect on what we can do to impact outcomes for youth and teens. Go to next here. So hopefully in your handouts, you saw the letter to the child. I'm actually also going to drop it here in the chat box for you. This is in the handouts of Google Classroom. So it's helpful. It's obviously not too lengthy, but I've included it here on the screen. I know sometimes over Zoom, smaller text isn't very readable. So I've also dropped that in the chat box that you can download. So I'm going to give everyone a few minutes, we'll say 5 minutes, to just fill out this. So imagine that you are writing a letter, like think of a young person in your life. It could be a child you're close to, it could be your own child, your grandchild, a niece or nephew, a friend's child. So think of a young child that you're close to personally and write this letter to them, but use this template. So, you might say, I might write a letter to I just got a new great nephew. So I might write a letter to him and say, welcome to the world. I hope that you grow up to be a happy, joyful person, whatever it is. And I want you to experience love in your life and to always, be learning, so however you want to fill in those blanks, but kind of use this template to write that letter. So if you have the handout handy and you want to write on it, or if you just want to kind of take note of the blanks, I'll give you until 12:08 to finish this, and then we'll check back in. have about 1 minute to finish up your letters. Okay, let's come back together here. I'm going to open up the whiteboard, which hopefully you all can see. And what I'd like to do is we'll kind of go around the Zoom room and everyone just share some of the things that you hoped in the letter that you wrote to the child in your life, some of the things that you hoped for them. So when you think about that, you know, your child, your grandchild, your niece, your nephew, your godchild, whatever, you know, that your best friend's daughter or son, what are the things that you hoped for that person or you dream for that young person? So we'll just kind of, if someone wants to get us started, I'm going to take some notes here in a list and kind of write down some of the things that you share.
I'll go ahead and start, Jenny.
Thanks, Betty.
I wrote this to my granddaughter, Gabby, who is a twin and is 11. And I said that I want her to be basically anything she wants to be. I want her to be able to, you know, believe in herself and feel that she can do that. I want her to experience love, be kind and caring. I want her to be happy and basically just experience success and be happy with her life.
Great. Perfect. So I'm trying to capture just some of the highlights there. Thanks, Betty, for sharing. Who else would like to share about their letter and what they hope for the young person in their life?
This is Frankie.
Okay.
One word, and I used happy.
Great. Yeah, you hope that that young person will be happy. Perfect.
This is Amni, and I put down healthy and happy. And I said I would like them to experience joy and fulfillment and feeling part of something.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this is Debbie. I said happy, carefree, and I hope that they experience life and always smile, and that they learn to love life and be a joy to others. And the greatest hope is you can be all you can be and take time to enjoy everything the world has to offer and to be yourself.
Great.
Hi, Jenny.
Hear
This
from
is
someone else.
Jenny.
I
This
put
is
that
Kathleen.
Let's do Pat first, and then we'll go to Julie.
Hi, Jenny. First of all, my apologies for getting in late. I've been having a lot of technical difficulties trying to get into this site, and I don't know why. So I came in late. I only saw part of it. But I did start off hoping they could be anything they wanted to be, experience joy, follow your dreams, accept challenges and succeed in them. And that's as far as I got before it clicked off. So
That is perfect.
I apologize. And also, I don't know if you got my message to you. I have to jump off online and get on the phone at 12:30 because I have a 1 o'clock appointment, but I can stay on the phone for the balance of it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks. Julie, you had something to add?
So I put that I would like for them to be their own advocates. I want them to use their own voice. I want them to experience security, consistency, emotional support, to always be resilient. I want them to be honest, have integrity and compassion, always be grateful. And I hope that they're physically and mentally well, that they dream big and have courage to follow those dreams and to always.
Thanks, Julie.
Well, Jenny, I didn't follow directions. I didn't go all the way through my list. I'm sorry. This is Frankie again. So I'll just go back through, and I did say happy, and then I said they would have joy, love life, be successful, however they define it. They would help others, that they would have peace and love in their life, that they would be adventurous, unafraid of change, and unafraid of change.
Great. Great. So that's a pretty good list. It's such a thorough list. We've run out of room. And I can't seem to spell adventurous properly. Okay, so I am going to switch sharing here and go back to the other. Great. Thank you for everyone. I tried to capture all the chats too and make sure we're not missing out anyone. So thanks everyone for contributing to that. Now let's shift gears a little bit and think about what types of outcomes that you hope for the young people that you work with, as well as, well, let's go through this one first. So let's just kind of share just kind of one word. What types of outcomes do you hope when you're thinking about through your work with CASA or through your professional work? What do you hope for the young people that you work with? Think about a teenager or an adolescent.
Are we just telling you our answers?
Yep,
Okay.
Just go ahead.
I would like to see the young people we work with feel empowered. I think that's so important for young adults, whatever. Teenagers.
Yeah, feeling empowered.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And I see Rhonda put in there that kind of finding fulfillment in their lives, kind of whatever that means to them. Great,
Mhm.
thank you.
Anyone
else have an idea?
I was going to say, I would like to see them believe in themselves and believe that they can achieve what they want.
Great. So I'm hearing already a lot of things that we put on the list when we were writing the letter to the child in our lives, right? A lot of those same things that we want for children or for
Jenny,
young people.
This is Tara. I know I'm not in this training, I'm just observing, but I have been working with teenagers and the one that I work with for a really long time. And one thing I wish for her, and that maybe sometimes is like, maybe we don't think about it a lot, is affection and love. Because I was somebody who was giving her just a simple hug. And I think that was the first time she had had a hug in a year, from somebody. So just affection, you kind of forget that they could be in residential facilities and affection's not really happening.
Yeah, good point. And Frankie adds to the chat, a positive support network, feel as though they were a part of the decision-making process about their lives. Seeing that there are people who care in their lives, kind of along Tara's point, and feeling the ability to break the cycle and create their own future. Great. So now let's shift gears a little bit and think about the child welfare system. So think of child protective services and kind of all of the, right, there are all these benchmarks that we follow when we think about permanency for a child. And when we think about a teenager who we know is going to be aging out or emancipating from foster care. So as we think about teens in the child welfare system, in the juvenile court system, who are moving from teenager in foster care to adult on their own, what are some of the things when we think about it from a child welfare perspective as a system that we see as success for young people who are transitioning from foster care? So like, for example, like having independent housing. So, what are those kind of ways that we determine like this person successfully transitioned from foster care? Already chat. They graduated high school. Thanks, Ashley. They have daily living skills. Absolutely. They went to college, right? Yep. We put a lot of benchmark on, you know, did they go to college, or kind of what's that after high school plan? Self-sufficiency. Yep. Yeah, and think for those of you that have worked with teens, think about those independent living services that are required, mandated to be provided. Graduation, post-graduation plans, job, college, trade. Great, thanks, Frankie. Anyone else have any other thoughts on how we say, yep, this child successfully emancipated from foster care and they're an adult now and we feel good about it? Tanya, great. They have an effective like post-care support network. Absolutely. They completed their service plan. Yep, service plan. And so some counties call it a family service plan. Some counties are using the term case plan. So we can use those interchangeably during our training. Great. So my next question is thinking about the list we made about kind of our hopes for young people, or, you know, when you're kind of thinking about that person in your personal, that child in your personal life that you love, and kind of the types of hopes and dreams that you have for them. And then think about kind of the way that we know our child welfare system and our juvenile court system measures success when we're talking about transitioning from teen and foster care to adult. What are some differences that you observe in those two lists? And if you want to share, feel free to unmute and share. Now come. So this was the list that we made when we were reviewing our letters. Yeah. So Frankie is kind of, you know, hitting the nail on the head there. Yeah, you know, sometimes those system benchmarks that we have in place don't always address those internal things that we care about for kids, right? So there's not necessarily a mechanism to make sure that we're looking at the whole child or the whole almost adult or young adult. Yeah, so, you know, looking at, has this child or teen kind of completed all the steps, right? Do we have a job and a place to live or a plan for school, you know, all those kinds of things. And yep, Ashley shares the system is more task oriented. And so, you know, here's what I take away from this kind, looking at these two lists, right, is, you know, there are lots of people in and around the child welfare system from all the different agencies, right, who, you know, care about kids and have, you know, a lot of those same hopes and dreams that you shared for the children that you're working with. But those things often occur adjacent to or outside of the system, of those systemic norms, because so much of the system focuses on those kind of bare minimums and those nuts and bolts of kind of preparing someone for adulthood. Whereas, you know, when you're all thinking about the children in your own lives or the children that you work with and care about, you're thinking about much bigger picture there. So I don't know that we can, in this group of, you know, just about a dozen of us, can change all the systems, right, to make sure that we're including all of these things. But I think this is the reason that CASAs, is the reason that advocates should be involved in these kinds of conversations as we move from, you know, youth to teen to adult, and making sure that we're looking at all of these pieces. And Tanya had shared something up in the chat a little bit ago, but talking about having an effective post-care support network, and really thinking about that through the lens of this list that you all made. Because we could make a post-care support network that is very task-oriented, right? Like, here's the person you'll call if you have a housing issue, and here's the person you'll call for job training or job coaching. But looking at those more informal pieces, right, of who's the person you're going to call when you've had a really bad day or a really good day? Who's the person that celebrates success with you? Who's the person that, you know, when you're really thinking about giving up, is going to say, absolutely not on my watch, you're not giving up. and trying to build those kinds of connections for youth and teens, because we know that's what we're hoping. Yep. So Tanya shares a little bit more, kind of her expertise and experiences here of, we're focusing on that basic needs, basic well-being. And it's hard, as she shares, outside of those mandates to think bigger than that. And that's why that's ideally why we have a lot of people coming into the table, so that we're making sure none of this is missed. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I share one of the things that got me really engaged in working with youth and with teens in particular stemmed from a time when I realized I had done a really bad job. As a caseworker, I had worked with a teenager. And of course, when I kind of closed the case, I said, oh, if you ever need anything, here's how you get it, feel free to reach out, kind of the thing you do. And I hadn't heard from her in a couple of years. And in the meantime, I left Children's Services and I came up here to CASA. And so this, now young adult was in college and had tried to reach me at Children's Services and couldn't find me there. Obviously, I didn't work there anymore. And so she Googled me and found me, walked into my office in the courthouse and said, well, you said if I ever needed anything, I could call you. And there had essentially been an issue with her university. Over winter break, the university shut down and closed the dorm. And she didn't have a place to go when that happened. So she was basically coming to me for kind of some urgent assistance. And on one hand, I could feel really good about myself that, right, as a caseworker, I built this good relationship with her. She sought me out, she trusted me. And I could, if this were about me, I could pat myself on the back for that. But really, when I think back on that, I think I failed her a little bit, because why, after 3 or 4 years, was the only safe, stable, consistent person she could think of to call when she needed a little bit of help was her caseworker from 4 or 5 years ago, right? That shouldn't have happened. And, that's what really kind of got me thinking about all of those gaps that exist within the mandated services, and how could we have done a better job of creating, kind of a circle of permanency connections for her beyond just the technical, who do you call when you need this or that, whatever, and creating those kind of, really robust support networks that aren't just necessarily there in an official capacity, but can kind of fill in those gaps between our service mandates. Yeah, so very point well taken. Tanya shared some great insight in the chat about just the demands that are placed on child welfare workers. And so sometimes it's difficult to work, kind of beyond those things. Great.
So Jenny, I have a question. I usually work with young children, so I'm not that familiar with working with teenagers, but is there no follow-up after they transition out then, with like somebody maybe just checking in on them like a month or two afterwards and just?
Not necessarily. Often sometimes a lot of our young people are enrolling in the Bridges program. So there are some more formalized supports through that. I know of many CASAs or independent living caseworkers or ongoing caseworkers who informally have kind of created those, hey, if you need anything, call me type relationships. But no, I mean, there's no systemic mechanism to provide ongoing support. And, there are some teens who kind of are turning 18 and saying, I'm good, leave me alone now.
Right.
But yeah, there's not necessarily a formal way to continue offering that support outside of like the Bridges and those types of things.
Okay, thank you.
Great. All right, so now let's, kind of with this theme of, kind of the hard and fast tasks and then all the things we know that make up a person, we're going to transition and talk a little bit about some data. So these are, this is fairly recent data. One thing that I hate about this data is it doesn't include pandemic numbers. So we don't really know yet statistically and kind of from a data perspective, how the pandemic impacted outcomes for foster youth and teens and young adults, my hunch is that it didn't help. So we'll be learning that in the next couple of years. But just, so you have some nerd stuff in your notes. Over 23,000 children, of course, we know will age out or turn 18 or 21 in the US foster care system every single year. That's what we expect. About 20% of those children who are in foster care will become instantly homeless when they turn 18, meaning that kind of system to prepare didn't work for them. So all those task-oriented things didn't work for them. And that now I could draw a hypothesis that, maybe when we're so focused on the tasks and not on all those circle of supports like Tanya was talking about, then when something goes wrong with one of those kind of tasks or one of those kind of task-oriented steps that we were following, there wasn't really anyone there to support that young person through that, right? If they had a dispute with a landlord or an issue there wasn't really anyone to support them through that rough patch. So there is some really exciting legislation going on and some recently passed bills. I encourage you to check out the FYI. It's FOSS. I'm not going to remember what the acronym stands for. I'll make sure I post some links to it in the Google Classroom. But there's some really interesting legislation and new policy coming through at the federal level that actually, fun fact, was started by foster youth and alumni from Ohio. So there is a group of foster care alumni who traveled to Washington, D.C. to advocate and help write legislation that now supports and improves, basically prioritizes housing assistance for foster alumni. So that's really exciting. I'll post some stuff there where you can see and learn a little bit more about it, but it's kind of cool that it came out of foster youth and foster alumni in Ohio that actually helped work on that. We know that, nearly half of young people who age out of the foster care system will struggle with finding reliable employment. And we know, of course, we all know the, what can happen in terms of moving forward through like higher education and things like that. Tanya shares a good point too about, returning to their birth families or families of origin. So, if that's their support system, then that support system might not necessarily be equipped to help navigate some of those issues that come up. Good point. We know that there's a high rate of unplanned pregnancy at a young age for people who leave the foster care system. We know that there's a high rate of PTSD diagnoses among young people who age out of the foster care system, and it's interferes with their daily lives. And of course, we know that over 20,000 people, when you think about the number of kids who are kind of quote unquote aging out of foster care, that's the number of young people for whom reunification failed and also other permanency failed, right? Those are children who didn't get adopted. Those are children who didn't reunify with their family. Those are children who didn't end up in the custody of a relative or someone like that. So if you think about the sustained trauma just from our intervention, right? There was probably a very good reason that Children's Services and the courts had to intervene in those children's lives and their families. So on top of whatever that very good reason was that they had to have this court intervention or this Children's Services intervention, our ongoing intervention probably caused a lot more additional trauma as well. And so that can get a little difficult and a little tricky. And there's probably a ton more, we could pull interesting facts and statistics and chew on those. These are some that I thought were most relevant to our conversation. So now I'm going to share a little bit of the qualitative data. So these are kind of what we're hearing. And this I actually have a lot more of too, if anyone wants to deep dive into some of these narratives with me. But I'll let you kind of, just to speed it up, I'll just kind of read them aloud. But former foster youth discuss that they understand the value of relationships and want to be in relationships, speaking specifically about higher education settings, so in colleges and universities. but that they become frustrated and experience a stigmatization by campus staff who are unaware or maybe just uninformed about their needs and experiences. Here in Athens, I'm in Athens County, which is the home of Ohio University. It's a pretty large university system. And this has been kind of an ongoing discussion that we have with Ohio University about creating kind of trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive faculty in order to be able to better support foster alumni when they're on campus. Still, you know, a lot of that, we've all learned about the basic brain development and kind of that frontal lobe and that executive functioning. So when someone is experiencing, and we're going to get way into the brain development in a couple of weeks, but when someone is experiencing that sustained trauma and those sustained heightened levels of cortisol, right, that stress, that kind of stress chemical, stress hormone in our brain, then it can impact our cognition, it can impact our executive functioning. So someone who has had prolonged experiences in foster care and probably prolonged experiences of maltreatment prior to that might have a little bit of trouble with organization, executive functioning, things like that, which can sometimes make it a little difficult to find success in our traditional higher education system. And so when we pair that with maybe a faculty or staff member who doesn't understand that need to be maybe a little more sensitive or to get a little creative, that can, you know, lead to just dropping out, you know, kind of maybe not wanting to go forward. One thing I will say is that when we talk with former foster youth, there is overwhelmingly a strong desire, strong determination to attend and finish college, of wanting to do that, wanting to achieve that, and wanting to work through that. It's just that, you know, sometimes I think our institutions, one, it's preparing the young person for that environment and for that experience, but then also preparing the institution to meet everyone's needs. And the interesting thing, when we've worked on this at an institutional level here locally, you know, sometimes there's resistance of, well, how many foster alumni do we really have at this college or at this university or at this campus? And, you know, is it really, you know, are we investing, you know, a lot of resources for a relatively small number of students? And so for those of you that have done any kind of trauma-informed care training, anything like that, we say, well, if you evolve your practice to meet some of your more vulnerable consumers, students, whatever, it actually ends up helping everyone, because we don't know what someone has experienced, right? You know, we can count the number of university students who have disclosed that they had foster care experiences, but there might be some out there who haven't disclosed that and don't need to disclose that. There might be people out there who have experienced very similar traumas, but didn't necessarily enter foster care, but still might benefit from having a more inclusive approach to their education. So for us, as you know, this is more at a system level, but I wanted to have this conversation because I think it can affect the way that we're working one-on-one with youth and teens. Okay. So when you think about the data, when you think about all that I shared, right, all those data points that I shared, the hard numbers, right, 23,000 young people emancipating from foster care, right, only half of them, you know, going on to get a job, right, all those things that I shared. And then I share those kind of more anecdotal stories. What do you think is the difference between those two types of data? What are you observing that's different between those two types? Yeah, Rhonda shares, right? The numbers shouldn't determine if anyone should be more sensitive or more trauma informed. Absolutely, I agree. Tanya shares, a youth that was estranged from parents and the admissions staff at her college pressured her to reach out to her birth parents for income information. Oh gosh, and did not understand why she was not willing or able to do that, to get that basic information for them. Absolutely. That's terrible to hear. And again, it kind of goes back to that, you know, sometimes we need a system because there's human error sometimes. So we do need like systemic steps but then sometimes we don't, we lose sight of critical thinking and all of those. Yeah, so that kind of reflecting, that we're reflecting those statistics. Absolutely. I think when I think about the two data sets, those kind of two sharings of data, the first is, again, a reflection of our measure of our system's success or failures, right? How many people have a job? How many people are having an unplanned pregnancy? How many people are experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder? How many, right? We're kind of looking at how many people are homeless. And the other one is, right, a reflection of experiences from people who are within those settings and sharing their experiences with us. Both are important, but I think a lot of times, as I shared with the university story, sometimes we really focus on the numbers, which are important. I'm a giant nerd, so I love the numbers. But sometimes we need to use those experiences and hear from the people that we serve and that we're trying to help, and let that inform and guide some of the decisions that we're making. So Stephanie shares that sometimes people who plan outcomes have not really been exposed to foster youth or trauma training. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's very true. I'm sure all of you that work with CASA, you've probably seen that as you've been out in the community, and kind of maybe we were talking about that before we started the session about working with schools and things. So, all right. So, just based on your own experiences, what you've read so far, what we've talked about so far, what are some things that we think former youth in care are telling us that we can do to inform our practices to improve outcomes? So thinking about all the things you've read so far, what are some things that from the perspective of those experiences, what are things that we can do to help improve outcomes? And feel free to unmute or use the chat box. Yeah, so Rhonda shares to be there for them emotionally. Absolutely. Being supportive and available. Anyone else have any other thoughts? Yep, just being understanding. Yeah, I think back, Tanya shared a lot of really great insights in the chat box, kind of finding those, particularly at CASA, trying to find those places where there often can be gaps between what other systems or what other agencies are providing, and getting creative with ways that we can help remedy some of those system gaps that are pretty obvious. Yeah, identify resources for post-foster care life. Absolutely. Building those kind of outside relationships. Yeah. I think so many times when we talk about identifying, think back to, before the child's 18, think back to when they're 14, 15, and we're talking about maybe relatives or supportive people in their life. A lot of times we're talking about that through the lens of placement. And if someone says, oh, I'm not in a place to have a teenager come live with me, like grandma or aunt, right? Aunt Joan says, oh, no, I can't, my apartment's too small, nobody can come live with me. Sometimes the system kind of moves on from that person because we're looking for placement at that time. So kind of going back through and looking, okay, Grandma Joan can't necessarily be a placement, but could Grandma Joan be supportive in other ways? Could this be a part of this kind of permanent support network? And maybe it's not a relative, maybe it's, the soccer coach from when they were, 12, that kind of just had a soft spot for them. Maybe that's one of the people that we try to plug in and pull in this way. So what are some ways, I'm sure all of you, I think most of you or all of you have been through CASA training. So you've been through the training talking about how race, gender, identity all influence our system, influence our outcomes, influence the professional behaviors in our system. So how do you think things like race or gender or general identity can influence some of the data points that we just read? Anyone have any thoughts? Well, while you're thinking, about 55% of the children in the US foster care system are children of color. And those children are generally more prone to experience poor outcomes than white children. And so, kind of if our goal is to improve outcomes for children of color, then we as the professionals or we as the system must really understand how structural and institutional racism kind of operates within our society and within our child welfare system and how it affects young people and their families. So what I hope, I'm going to post some more resources about this and more information or, kind of food for thought about this in the Google Classroom. So, kind of thinking about it. I know, and for those of you that are from Athens like me, we are in a fairly, we're not in a very diverse community, right? We're not in an incredibly diverse community in some of our smaller towns outside of Athens. But even here, there's disproportionality of people of color being represented in our child welfare system, even though, we don't have a lot of diversity in our community to begin with. Yeah, so Stephanie shares a great point that trauma from one of these issues might have kept them, might have created kind of a stagnation, right, in their life. So that might have an impact on those outcomes. And right, we could pick apart and hypothesize what system barriers kind of interfered with that too. Julie shares a good point that children of color are left in foster care or put into the foster care, and some may not understand that children from the LGBTQ community and may not be supportive. Absolutely. The latter is one we're really struggling with a little bit down here in Southeastern Ohio, is sometimes our caregivers aren't very accepting or struggling a little bit with some of these issues of maybe trying to require that a young person dress a certain way to kind of match a societal expectation of gender. And then that kind of creates some issues there. Yeah, Rhonda shares that, just a general lack of diversity and then our kind of tendency to lean into stereotypes might interfere with outcomes. Absolutely. One thing I've realized, and we've been kind of evaluating our practice here at Athens CASA. And I don't know how many of your counties utilize in-camera interviews where a child can meet privately with the judge and their CASA. So we utilize those quite a bit here in Athens. And one thing I realized when we were talking about, because it's us, we decide when to request one of those. And I noticed we have a new judge and he's been commenting after in-cameras about children, the children and teens that he does in cameras with being very respectful, very, very resilient, very smart. So good feedback, right? Great things for a young person to hear the judge saying about them. But lots of comments about like very respectful, very well behaved. And it kind of was a hard reality for us to accept here that we were more likely to request an in-camera interview of a child or a teen who had a history of of being very well behaved, of not breaking rules, of not kind of, being the subject of a lot of phone calls about their behavior. And I realized that we were less likely, right? When I look at our data, at our requests, that we're less likely to request an in-camera interview when a teen or a child has a history of having challenging behaviors. So like, whoa, right? I like to think of us as being pretty good at this, and recognized a bias in our own practice. We were also more likely to request in cameras with girls than boys. And I don't know what that means, but it's something, right? We have to pay attention to that and learn from that. So when I look kind of through our own data and our own practice, I was like, oh gosh, we have a little bit of work to do here. So just kind of an interesting thoughts when you really sit back and reflect on your own practice. And sometimes we have biases that we don't even recognize that are informing and influencing our practice that we haven't even thought about. But yeah, that's an interesting thought, that we tended to, with a teen who tended to be more well-behaved or high achieving, we were more likely to give them the chance to go and talk to the judge privately than maybe a teen who'd been in a residential facility and was kind of constantly getting written up for rules violations or things like that. And so we're obviously adjusting our practice and learning from that, but an interesting point. So we've kind of already talked about this, but kind of laboring through this data, laboring through some of this information that we've shared so far, you know, in your mind, why is this important? Why should we be talking about this? Why did we spend, you know, half of a session talking about this? Or does this matter? Does this data matter? So in my perspective, kind of the way I was just sharing with you a little snag in our own data, in our own office and practice, is that I don't know I would have realized that this kind of bias existed in our practice if I weren't looking at the actual data, if I didn't kind of strip my own experiences away from it and only look at our data. And then when I started there, when I looked at the numbers, and then I started working backwards to say, oh gosh, we do actually do that. That is how our practice goes, and that's not okay. Yeah, Rhonda shares, it's kind of this baseline, it's a reflection of practice. And, you know, all of us, right, we all care about the kids and teens that we work with. So it's sometimes hard for us to imagine in our own practice that we wouldn't be doing what's always best for them. And so when we can kind of take a few steps back and look at the data and kind of look at our stats, we can get a better idea of what's really happening and identify those areas where we could improve our practice a little bit. Absolutely. And I think especially when we start talking more and more about teens who are going to be transitioning out of foster care, right, we really want to be kind of grounded in the reality of what they're experiencing and what's going on, and how can we work to change that narrative for older youth, right? If you look through some of those statistics, right, about homelessness, about, I don't think I put one on there about food insecurity, but someone who ages out of foster care is more likely to experience food insecurity in their early adult life. So imagine, right, we all know our brains aren't fully developed until we're 24, 25, 27 years old. So imagine trying to go about the business of daily living, also trying to grow the rest of our brains, and then maybe not having access to healthy food. And so kind of this ongoing thing. So I think we kind of owe it, right? We owe it to the children trusted to our systems to work on improving these outcomes. I'm having a little trouble trying to get my slide to switch. So we'll just abandon ship on the slides. So we have just a few minutes left. And I have one final kind of question, but I'd love to hear if any of you have any reactions or any thoughts, if something's been swirling around in your head while we've been talking that might benefit the group, if anyone would like to share. Okay, y'all are like, let's just get off here so we can go eat some lunch. Okay, so our reflection question for today, it's in the Google Classroom, and it is to think about one thing that you can incorporate into your practice with young people that might influence outcomes. So that's in the Google Classroom for today. So you can just go in and click and answer that question. I know some of you already started answering it, so that's fine. If you want to go back in and add more, based on some of the statistics that you learned today, or some of the stories that you heard today, or even just in hearing from the expertise around the room of things other people were sharing that they do that's been successful. And we'll move forward from there. As I look to next week, we'll be heading into our third module, and that is we'll really start looking at adolescent development, and specifically how a placement into foster care or any substitute care setting, what impact that has on adolescent development. So all the handouts and all of that will be posted in Google Classroom, and you can kind of get prepared from there. But there's some pre-reading that's not necessarily required for next week, but might just be of interest to all of you as you prepare for next week's session. All right, if there are no other questions, I will give you 8 minutes of your day back and see you all next Tuesday. Bye, everyone.